Hello everybody, my name is Danny. In case you're new, I am a Ex-JW. I was born and raised in a very devoutly Jehovah's Witness household. Today, what we're going to be doing is reviewing a video that actually I was immediately compelled to click on because I was profoundly interested in it from Heliocentric. Obviously, it's this video, which is Disfellowshipped, the Shunning Practices of Jehovah's Witnesses Explained by an Atheist, because I just find it to be very interesting. Obviously, this guy here, Jared, has virtually zero experience with Jehovah's Witnesses other than auditing the halls. As you can actually see, there's one of them. He actually did 2 different videos that I know of. Now, of course, we get this one. This one, he actually worked with some people, as you can see. This guy named Dr. Ryan Lee. And Welcome to the World seems pretty clear that he might himself even be an Ex-JW. Either that, or he just is used to seeing a lot of those people, and so hearing about it, and so he developed kind of a way to talk with them. So obviously you have a bunch of other people. Actually, Ready to Harvest is interesting to see here. I've never actually watched anything from Ready to Harvest. I've considered it before because of actually useful charts. And Ready to Harvest has been making some videos supposedly on witnesses as well recently, which I find to be interesting because I'm pretty sure he's actually has his own, religion, so to speak. In other words, he's of a different religion. So I just find it to be kind of interesting that he would do that. Of course, you have Esoterica, which is interesting. Religion for Breakfast, Mike Winger, Nemo the Mormon. There's the connection to Mormonism again. And of course, alt-worldly. So there's a lot of other people in here. And actually, the comments on this video, some of them are pretty heavy, some of them. And very interesting, too, actually. It's pretty universal, exactly what you would expect out of those comments. So this is the video we're going to review today, and obviously endless amounts of people, both Ex-JWs, probably PIMOs, and others, have all reviewed this quite positively.
I must say that it was one of the most disillusioning experiences of my life.
Sonia Erickson has been disfellowshipped.
At least for people who grow up in it, that's all you have.
An autocratic ruling council called the governing body.
And who often have the loudest voice promoting this false message? Apostates.
This is a pain that doesn't go away.
Tears do not necessarily indicate sincere repentance.
He has to be disfellowshipped.
Was no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Well, these apostates.
Ridiculous.
Was disfellowshipped?
Disfellowshipped.
I didn't think that I was going to survive it, honestly.
Normally I start out these videos with like a joke or a gag, but I just got nothing this time, man. It's like 9:30 at night, and I've been stewing all day on how to make this video, and I'm still kind of at a loss for words, so please bear with me. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. That's you. Thanks for being here on the couch to another exciting episode of Atheist Church Audit. My name is Jared, and I'm an atheist, and today I didn't go to a church. No, I went to a kingdom hall. This is, I believe, my 4th visit to a local kingdom hall, and it's been a minute. This is my 3rd video on the Jehovah's Witnesses, and my first 2 videos cataloged 3 meetings that I've had with them. And that was maybe a couple of months ago at this point that I was actually there in those services. I've been attempting to do the deep dive into the Jehovah's Witnesses, which is cool on paper, but the dirty secret of my life is that I'm actually completely illiterate.
Well, I can't read.
So in the past couple of months, I have learned a lot about Jehovah's Witnesses and the governing body and the 144,000 and 1975, and there's a lot there. There's really a lot there, and I know that I have only just begun to scratch the surface of this incredibly complicated organization. And let me say this from the get-go. I know that I will never know as much as most Ex-JWs know. I will never know as much as your average Jehovah's Witness knows. And the purpose of this channel, my goal is to kind of gain a bird's eye view of everything and then compare it with another bird's eye view of everything with other denominations and other religious movements. But even beyond just trying to learn and understand what people believe, what people think, I want to know how people feel. And I want to know how religion feels. There's a lot of really excellent and amazing YouTube channels all about what people believe and better understanding, historical developments and archaeological findings and very nitty-gritty nuts and bolts things about religions and faith, and I just don't have the brain power to do that.
It's actually also very important to get the outside perspective. because you obviously don't want an echo chamber, right? You don't want to only hear and see and know everything that you already personally know or have experienced, or all the similar identical experiences. It's understandable from a human sense that you kind of almost want to have getting confirmation bias, basically. You want to hear more of what you've experienced so that it validates your experience more. It makes you feel more related to, relatable, and that is that you can relate better to other people so that it's not that much of a standout experience. Especially when, again, you're always consistently denied your experiences by these kinds of people that are in these kinds of cults posing as religions that we call things like Jehovah's Witnesses, the Latter-day Saints, some Mormons, or Scientology, or whatever else, because there's plenty others out there. You get gaslit, you get alienated, you get absolutely shat on and torn to pieces because, none of that can be valid for whatever excuses they come up with. So it's understandable that you can almost want to have a confirmation bias so that you can feel like, okay, so it isn't just me, or like my experience wasn't necessarily unique. This is something that's pretty universal. But then you can almost get yourself trapped in a cycle of that confirmation bias, making yourself enter into an echo chamber. That's why it's really good to have the outside perspective. Because when you get that, it gives you a new lens to look at things and analyze it with. It gives you a even broader picture and even more complete picture of everything, so that you actually better understand other people and other perspectives or understandings or beliefs or whatever else, feelings, but also you're able to better understand other people's experiences and thus differences. And I think that that's really obviously imperative. It's actually one of the reasons why I even have this channel in the first place, especially once, like a couple of years ago, I started to do commentaries more and more frequently. Now I just do commentaries instead of gaming, apparently, which this channel started off with. But that's why I decided to do it, because I'm a very expressive person. It's actually funny because I've been helping out my older neighbor across the way next door lately, and she's like, I wouldn't actually attack you for somebody who's socially awkward or that is somebody who's necessarily introverted. It's like, well, I very much am. It's just the fact that I'm also very, I would argue, hyper expressive. I'm not just super expressive or very expressive, I'm excessively expressive. I really love sharing my thoughts and my feelings on things, especially the more passionate I am about it, the more experience I have with it, or the more interest I have in it, the more my brain just have the urge to just express and talk about these things. And so that's kind of like a part of the purpose of why I do this commentary stuff now, is because I want to be able to share my perspectives and other people's perspectives and opinions too, so that you can get a better, broader picture, and hopefully other people, maybe people who feel like they're kind of outcasts or wallflowers, are kind of isolated on their own because they haven't necessarily heard similar ways of thinking or going about things or talking about things or analyzing things or experiencing things or whatever else, find something in this that's valuable enough that actually makes them feel like they finally have something they can grasp onto and be like, okay, so it really isn't just me as much as it's felt like it, right? And I feel like that's really important to do, which again goes back to my point of why what Jared here is doing is actually really imperative. We need as broad a perspective and as many perspectives and differences as possible to be able to truly get a full picture of anything. You can't just trust certain people, your own experiences, the people who can provide the confirmation bias that have had similar, the identical experiences, or even, yes, people hate hearing this now, but even the experts, you can't fully trust them either. You have to get perspectives and thoughts and considerations and, information of every kind from everybody. Otherwise, you're never going to have the full picture. And I think that that's really, again, that's all the more reason why this is super important.
I was going into this whole thing asking the question, how does disfellowshipping feel? So for those of you who are not Ex-JW, disfellowshipping is a very austere form of excommunication that the Jehovah's Witnesses have. So essentially, the disfellowshipping practice...
It isn't like excommunication. It is technically exactly the same as excommunication or expulsion, or there's a billion different terms you could use to rebrand it, but disfellowshipping is just another name for expulsion or excommunication. That is what it is. Again, that's the key piece to Jehovah's Witnesses. Remember, they're obsessed with rebranding absolutely everything and then insisting that that makes it somehow completely different when they're clearly the same things. it might be considered a more extreme version of it, but maybe that's more, I would say for Catholics, it's more modern day, because historically the Catholics are just as, if not more vicious with excommunication and how they treat those people than not. Instead of not associating with them at all, if you're especially a church member, so now there's not like somebody who's a follower of Catholicism, but actually a like rank and file member of, you know, one of the churches or parishes or whatever, they would absolutely target you. You would probably actually be potentially victims of crimes, if not actually assassination attempts, basically. You did attempts on your life because you could not exist because you were a heretic. So arguably, historically, it was actually slightly more severe than Jehovah's Witnesses. However, given what we know about psychology today and the emotional damage things can cause, it could actually be considered equally as bad, just very different. Because with Jehovah's Witnesses, their way of doing it is isolate, isolate, isolate. Make sure that you always have full abandonment, complete abandonment of this person. Do not, if you see them, immediately look away. Do not act like they do not exist, and try to get out of there as fast as you can and away from that person, because apparently their very existence is poisonous to your spirituality. It will lead you astray like they were, to be influenced by Satan as demons. It always goes back to Satan as demons or J-dubs. But like, that's basically their version of the same thing. And abandonment is a majorly traumatizing thing, even for people that are the most hard-headed people that are supposedly super independent and like they're super resilient. They may not ever publicly or ever share it with anybody that it has traumatized them. They might not even realize they're traumatized, but it's 100% guaranteed you will be at least somewhat traumatized by that.
This, as it stands currently, is if you either apostatize or commit a serious enough sin, which usually is pretty innocuous in the grand scheme of things, they will excommunicate you.
Quit mixing in company with anyone who is not living according to Christian standards.
Yeah, I forgot. Apparently, I don't know which of the Ex-JW community found it out. I don't know if it was like in JW broadcasting on, thus it's on JW.org or something, but apparently there's officially a website and an app now that's literally just for Jehovah's Witnesses for dating, which is so weird. It's like, you've gotta be kidding me, especially considering when the world is realizing how much of a true cult you are and how insular you are, which is a key piece of a cult. You go even more publicly insular and make your memberships even more, members, your followers, even more insular. So even more cult heavy, where it's like you can only be in your this tiny little Jehovah's Witness bubble, and everything else is evil, and Satan and his demons influence you. So you can only date other JWs, which means here's an application for you on your phone or your tablet to go date other witnesses. What? Is the weirdest thing. It just I don't know. For me personally, that feels so heebie-jeebie weird. It's so profoundly bizarre, and it's definitely was not on my bingo card. There's a lot of things on my witness bingo card that they'd start to do that were weird or stupid and technological, but that was not one of them.
Now, other denominations have, some sort of like excommunication as well, but usually it's like you get kicked out of church leadership, or if you really suck, you'll be kicked out of the church. Jehovah's Witnesses take this to an insane extreme, where for the longest time, if you got kicked out of the church and you were dubbed a disfellowshipped person, your family can't contact you. Your best friends who are still in the Kingdom Hall, they're not allowed to say hello to you. And I was kind of skeptical of that. You hear stories like that, and it's like, but no, I mean, that's the protocol, but nobody's actually living like that. And then just seeing so many stories and talking to so many people who told me, no, I haven't talked to my parents in 5 years. I just couldn't fathom it. I couldn't make sense of it. So normally, the way that it actually plays out is, let's say you boink your girlfriend.
What do I have to do for you to have sex with me?
Or as the J-dubs like to call it, commit fornication. Naughty, naughty, naughty. If you get found out, well, the elders might take you aside and say, hey, you've done this very bad, no good thing. and you're disfellowshipped. They might have like a 2-hour long conversation with you and try to, assess the severity of the situation. But often at the end of this conversation, it is, well, you are no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And here is the aftermath of that. They go up to the microphone at a normal Sunday meeting and they say, and Sister Tamitha Rose is no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And from that moment, you're not allowed to talk to them. Maybe you can send them one final goodbye text, but outside of a life-threatening emergency, you are not allowed to have any conversation with them. Now, here was a misunderstanding that I had. There's almost like 2 tiers of disfellowshipped people. There are disfellowshipped people who are actively trying to get back into the Kingdom Hall, and there are disfellowshipped people who are apostates. So if you, fall to your knees and grovel and beg and whimper, then maybe the elders will have pity on you and say, we can tell that you're sincere and you genuinely want to cultivate a relationship with Jehovah. And then they'll basically put you on probation. So you're allowed to come to the Kingdom Hall. You're allowed to sit and listen to the talks and read through the Watchtower with everyone else. But outside of the Kingdom Hall, people cannot talk to you. So that's one group. The other group are apostates, people who are against Jehovah's message. Now, if you're in the apostate group, you're fucked. I mean, this is something that tears families apart. But what's kind of terrifying about all of this is that the official policy to this day, from what I understand, you have to kind of infer whether a person is in like this disfellowship limbo or if they're an apostate. If you look behind you and see the disfellowship person, it's like, oh, okay, well, he's here, so he's probably, trying to take the right steps to, grovel and moan until he's back in good standing, and then we can, talk about Call of Duty again. But if the person's not there, uh-oh, maybe they're against Jehovah. And nobody should be surprised at this, that this is one of the most taxing and psychologically damning things that you can do to a person, especially because already the Jehovah's Witnesses are told over and over and over again to beware of worldly pleasures and beware of worldly temptations and beware of worldly influences. They don't have friends outside of the Kingdom Hall. And when you tell them, hey, you can't talk to anyone in the Kingdom Hall ever again, where the hell do they go? So for people who are disfellowshipped, whether it's as an apostate or somebody trying to get back into right standing with the Kingdom Hall, you're cut off from your community, either indefinitely or for months until you are in right standing with the community again. And that just made my heart sink. So
that's the point, though. That's a classic case of preying on human psychology. That's why they do that. That's why they are so insular, actually. A huge part of it is because they want you to feel like you've lost literally everything and that you will have absolutely nobody who will ever support you, ever like you, ever be your true friend, ever will have your best interest at heart, ever will, help you, support you, literally do anything. You are going to be all 100% alone. And you will have nobody and nothing. And it'll be all your fault because you spurned Jehovah God. And therefore, their hope is that will lead you eventually to come back and grovel so that you will become one of them again. And you will never question the doctrine because you'll just have it happen again. And then that means you didn't learn your lesson. And it'll be even harsher on you next time. And then, well, guess what that means? You're even more fearful. So you're even less likely to do it. It's just basic human psychology. This is what totalitarian dictators have done throughout history. It is one of the favorite tools is preying on basic human psychology. You got to remember and understand that basic human psychology and human psychology in general is egregiously simplistic. It is one of the most wildly basic things in the world. To think, no pun intended, but to think that we feel we're so incredibly capable, intelligent, at the human material level is wildly inaccurate. And I feel like human history has proved that relentlessly throughout time. Especially when it comes down to how easy it is to manipulate and prey on people. And that's exactly what dictators, autocrats, so on, have always done. And also, therefore, cults. Like Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, and of course, Scientology. This is the point of why they fearmonger. This is why the governments do the same thing and everything else. They want to fearmonger so that you will never, ever stop being a cog in the corporate machine till the day you die, or in a cult's case, like Jehovah's Witnesses, that you will never question and you will never leave. That's the point. Or if you did leave and you got disfellowshipped, that you will again fear and realize you have nothing, and so you'll come back. Because the indoctrination will also lead you to potentially fear trying to befriend or trusting anyone who isn't a Jehovah's Witness, because God forbid that might actually be what they've been indoctrinated with might actually be true, and it might actually be Satan as demons leading you to be destroyed in Armageddon or whatever else. And so you don't want to risk doing that. Plus, they're the most violating people out there, clearly. That's why, you know, say the apostate, aka the Ex-JW community, is such a vastly and rapidly growing group, because, you know, nobody can relate. Nobody feels like there's a sense of community here at all, clearly.
That's the backdrop for all of this. However, recently, back in I think March, the governing body, the you know, holy aristocrats who run this whole thing, they rolled out some new policies.
What if a disfellowshipped person comes to a congregation meeting? Under our current arrangement, we don't say a greeting to individuals who've been removed from the congregation. However, the governing body has decided that publishers can use their Bible-trained conscience to decide whether to give a simple greeting and welcome a disfellowshipped individual who attends a congregation meeting.
Hi. So good to see you here.
Thank you.
While we wouldn't have an extended conversation or socialize with such a person, we do not need to ignore him completely.
First and foremost, I think that they've entirely done away with the term disfellowshipped. So now a person is no longer disfellowshipped, they are removed.
I only
which,
just learned
again,
that, by the way.
if I'm understanding this correctly, is a total misnomer. The removed people are still allowed to come to the Kingdom Hall, but what you're talking about being removed from is removed from family gatherings, removed from any interactions with your friends and family. You're removed from any, you know, social status among your peers. You are persona non grata among everyone you know. And ultimately the reason why they're even rolling out these new updates is because they're in a legal battle with the government of Norway?
We want many different countries, not just Norway. Kiwi Land, New Zealand, Australia, Britain, although that's the only one that got thrown out, was a Britain one, which should never have been thrown out in the first place. There's everything against them, and they still threw it out for some fucked up reason. Netherlands, I'm pretty sure, at least at one point, was either supposed to or they did have one. Again, I'm like way behind on like how many different countries there are, because apparently there's so many more than I remember that are suing or set to sue and take to court the entire organization of Jehovah's Witnesses for almost universally the same things. It's the shunning thing, which is therefore child abuse, and then also the other form of child abuse, which is so famous, which is child sexual assault and or trafficking and or molestation, which is kind of one of the most big things that Jehovah's Witnesses are famous for, is harboring those people.
To express our grave concern to deprive Jehovah's Witnesses in Norway of state grants and, most importantly, registration as a religious community.
It's so contrived, man. So previously, if you were a disfellowshipped person and you were to come into a kingdom hall, they would not say a word to you. If you were a recognized disfellowshipped person, you would walk in there and your own mother would look you in the eyes and turn the other direction. So now, the governing body, in trying to soften language around the disfellowshipping arrangement, has said, well now, it is appropriate to greet them with a warm welcome. You can say, hi, hello, how are ya? But you must not get into an extended conversation. No, no, no. The other exception is that you're allowed to talk to disfellowshipped people if it is for the express reason of asking them to come back to the Kingdom Hall or inviting them to a meeting.
That means we don't socialize with those who are removed from the congregation. However, that does not mean that a Christian could not invite a disfellowshipped person to attend a congregation meeting.
But if it's not that, and it's not a life or death medical emergency, so that's the backdrop to all of this today. And I was very scared.
Actually, there's a key point to this. And obviously he must not realize this, or he must want to not believe it's true. But there is a stupid amount of people who have wound up on their deathbeds or ended up in a grave medical situation where they are like 50-50 gonna die, or worse chances of, higher chances of dying. And their families and all these people that are Jehovah's Witnesses still will refuse to do anything about it. They do not care. They still will not talk to them. They still will not associate with them or anything, because they're still disfellowshipped and or they're apostate. And that's more common than you probably realize if you are not experienced in the arts of Jehovah's Witness fuck yourself syndrome. So yeah, it's pretty great. There's literally kids, teenagers or whatever, or kids that literally get abandoned by their parents. They get kicked out of the house. They get forced to take on a job while they're still in school and go try to figure out where the hell they're going to go and how the hell they're going to suddenly find a shelter to be able to get a roof over their head and at least a P.O. box, so that way they can get mail, so they can even have a job in the first place, because that is required in the U.S. So you have to have a P.O. box at least in order to have a job. If you do not have a stable, single location P.O. box or address, basically, for postage, you're fucked. And you can't get a job either, because they have to have that attached. So literally what they're doing when they do that to these younger people is they are fucking them over as hard as they can. They're like, we genuinely do not care about your life. We do not care about your safety. We do not care about your health. We do not care about your ability to take care of yourself or lack thereof. We do not care about your ability to get a place of living or your lack thereof. We do not care about your ability to not actually get a job, to be able to provide for yourself or your lack thereof. Because you can go fuck yourself with some rusty metal rebar up your ass. Because how dare you question or do anything that could dare suggest that you are questioning the doctrine and the governing body's word and everything else. And it's royally fucked up. You go down the comments on this video, you will see a handful of people who are literally talking about their own personal experience where they were kicked out of the house at 15 and completely abandoned. Therefore, legally in most countries, that's what is defined as child abandonment, which is like one of the ultimate forms of child neglect. And it's a major high profile crime in most nations, understandably so. This is a commonplace thing in Jehovah's Witnesses as well. They don't care what age you are, you can go fuck yourself.
Skeptical. And I needed to see this for myself. And I didn't just want to see it from somebody else's vantage point. I wanted to experience it myself. So today I went to a Kingdom Hall and I told them that I was a disfellowshipped person. So I rolled up to the Kingdom Hall this morning. This was a different Kingdom Hall from either of the previous two that I've been to. I combed my hair, had my nice dress shirt on, I was ready to go. I walk through the door and I meet a guy in his mid-30s named Alex. And he welcomes me with a big warm smile and says, "Hey, welcome brother, yeah, I haven't seen you before." So I introduced myself, and the protocol, if you're disfellowshipped, is you're supposed to announce the fact that you're disfellowshipped. Almost like you're telling a lover that you have an STD. So I say, "Hey man, my name is Jared, and just full disclaimer, I'm a disfellowshipped person." Now, in hearing a lot of these Ex-JW stories and in hearing a lot of disfellowshipping stories, I was really expecting kind of a cold, closed off, look of horror, and I didn't get that. Instead, I got, "Well, hey man, we're so grateful to have you." And I gotta be honest that it kind of took me by surprise, because I was ready to be treated like a pariah. But to my shock and amazement, I wasn't. So I took my seat and had the normal, very uncomfortable Kingdom Hall experience. The music is still bad, the Watchtower is still boring, the people are still incredibly nice, and there just wasn't a whole lot to write home about. For some reason in the Watchtower, the whole discussion today was all about courtship, which is probably only applicable to like 10% of the congregation. I thought it was silly. I just recommended to everyone that they should just read a copy of I Kissed Dating Goodbye. Hold on, I think I have a copy. Hold on. Let's go, baby. The Watchtower basically just copied and pasted this entire book. That sexy fedora youth pastor motherfucker. Fun fact, from the ages of 14 to 22, I didn't kiss a girl. Which is why women often report that my kisses now feel like the buttery tail of a freshly baked lobster. Anyway, so The only thing that was really of note about the sermon was that the circuit overseer gave both talks today. And I didn't really know what a circuit overseer was, but he like has some, authority role over like several kingdom halls in the area. So I'm just gonna equate it to a bishop. I don't really know or care. So he finishes his talk. He was very, well-spoken, very articulate. And then the mingling happens, the post-service shuffle. And the woman to my left introduces herself and says, "Hey, my name is Amy," or whatever. And I just wanted to say I was admiring your Bible. Fun fact, I like to pretend that I know how to read Greek. And so I flip through with like a interlinear. As an aside, I learned this recently. The New World Translation, which is the official translation of the Jehovah's Witnesses, the most qualified person on that committee who translated the New World Translation was Fred Franz, the 4th president of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. You want to know how much formal Greek training Fred Franz had? 2 years. 2 years at the University of Cincinnati, which technically means that I have more Greek training than he did. That's kind of a big yikes, considering I barely remember the Greek alphabet. Thus saith the Lord, I am the Alpha and the Omicron. But anyway, I'm talking to this woman next to me, and we're having a little chit chat, and very early on, I say, "Also, just wanted to let you know I'm disfellowshipped." And she perked up and she was like, "Oh, well, we're so glad that you're here." And, we chit-chatted about my little interlinear Bible a little bit more, and I showed her how to use it, and she was like, "Oh, that's so cool. Well, we hope you have a wonderful time, and we hope to see you again." And it was, pleasant niceties, like maybe more pleasant than I was expecting. So after I said hi to the woman on my left, the elder comes down and, I'm a new face, so he introduces himself and says hi, and then we start chatting. And again, I very quickly let him know, like, "Hey man, thanks so much for the warm welcome. Just wanted to let you know I'm a disfellowshipped person." And I think, he was maybe like a little surprised, but he wasn't like horrified. And we talked for a little bit, and he was like, "Well, yeah, they recently updated some new policies, and yeah, if I could get your phone number, I'm happy to send you the new information." And I was like, "Yeah, I would actually love that." And then his wife came by. And the fact that, in this very brief conversation, he didn't need to tell her that I was disfellowshipped. It was just a really quick exchange, but that seemed relevant. And we were talking about work and where we live. So we had a nice little back and forth. And then he was like, "Well, yeah, man, you're welcome back anytime. We hope to see you again." I was like, "Okay."
So see, this, I could tell obviously you started this off that with this experience he had, that this was actually the perfect reference point to go back to this video here. Tickles loins. The 3 main archetypes of Jehovah's Witnesses. In fact, there's actually technically arguably 4. There's a 4th one kind of snuck in there, and so I went into detail, simplified detail, explaining those 3 different types, using in fact examples of those that I personally have known in my life. And so this doesn't feel like something that is just because of the fact that they had the change in the policy of their company. Because this, to me, clearly comes off as a case of and this the really much more warm, open, conversational type, right? The ones that are a lot more willing to socialize. To the extent that they're even more willing to talk to even apostates. They don't care if you are one, they'll still socialize and talk with you, which is cool. And some of them genuinely could give 2 fucks if, you were to continue to go or not. They don't care if you study, they don't care if you believe, they don't care to try to convince you to. They're genuinely more, I think it's more content of character as an actual just general everyday person, that they actually have a better heart and they actually care enough and have enough compassion and understanding enough to be like, yeah, I'm not going to treat these people like a dick, and I'm not going to try to pressure them into hey, you really need to come to more meetings, or oh, you really need to start studying with us, or oh, you should study, or oh, you need, what about this scripture or that scripture? They don't do that. They will actually just simply be treating you like you would treat your neighbor, right, and talk with them that way, which is, I think, really cool.
Interesting, cool. I get up to leave, I grab my handy-dandy Watchtower magazine, and I make for the door. At the door, I run into this guy Alex again, and had a little bit further of a conversation. Now, my conversation with Alex felt the most substantive. Now, he never asked why I was disfellowshipped. He never asked what the things leading up to it were. Basically, all I said was, yeah, I had heard that there were some new disfellowshipping guidelines, and I just wanted to come and see what they were. And he seemed almost excited to tell me, man, we're so grateful because now, the governing body has really been reflecting on the kindness and the mercy of Jehovah. And we feel that these new policies are more in alignment with that part of his character. And I didn't really know how to press him on it. Just the conversation didn't really go the way that I was anticipating, and I was kind of caught off guard. I also was not there to start a scene. So I asked him the question though, well, that's very interesting, and I'm happy to hear that, that things are moving in a better direction. But did the governing body make a mistake previously when the rules were more austere? And his response was something along the lines of, well, as we get closer and closer to these latter days, the governing body is receiving more and more accurate understanding of scripture. At about this point, the circuit overseer comes and makes an introduction. And again, I didn't really know who this guy was, but apparently I was very lucky to have caught him on this particular Sunday. So we shake hands, we say hello, I tell him I'm disfellowshipped. So I ask him and this gentleman, Alex, and I say something to the effect of, I guess I'm still trying to wrap my head around who is welcome at a Kingdom Hall. And they're like, well, what do you mean? And I say, well, I have some atheist friends. Would they be welcome to, come to a Kingdom Hall? And there was a look of hesitation on the circuit overseer's face. And I was like, oh, no, not like one of these people who come to disrupt the service, not one of these people, who grab the microphone and start yelling about the child sexual assault cases, which are very real, but just like a run-of-the-mill atheist who, maybe they're antagonistic towards the message, but if they were to come and be polite and to sit and listen and be attentive and then leave respectfully, would they be welcome? And the circuit overseer said, yes, absolutely, without any hesitation. So Alex and I talked a little bit more, and maybe he was breaking the rules a little bit because we started talking about travel, which seemed like a little bit of a detour from the strict guidelines of you can only say welcome and hello, but you should not have any extended conversations. So maybe he was doing a naughty, but it was really appreciated because he was cool and I enjoyed talking to him. And then he told me I was welcome back. So let me get this out of the way. I feel very conflicted right now, and I feel very weird because this is not at all the reaction that I was expecting. I was expecting to go in and be treated like a pariah. I was assuming that the governing body, even though they laid out these new principles, I figured that they were, still gonna try to keep me at arm's length. And to my surprise, they didn't. And it was confusing because on the one hand, I've heard a lot of really horrifying Ex-JW testimonies about what it's like to be disfellowshipped, and then here today it was like, well, it's not pleasant, sure, but I mean, it doesn't seem that bad. But I knew that I was missing some key parts of the puzzle here. I knew that I wasn't seeing the whole picture. So I decided to go out of my way and talk to some people who have a little bit more of a comprehensive experience with being disfellowshipped.
What do people who have never been associated with the Jehovah's Witnesses need to know about disfellowshipping?
They need to know that it's a million times worse than what you think it is. It's not just a quirky religious thing. They're really? They shun you? They don't talk to you at all? I'm like, yeah, no. I haven't heard from my own sister, who I was very close with, in years. My parents and my siblings, they have pretty much no contact with me, and my mom made that super clear when I got disfellowshipped at first, that they were going to be loyal to Jehovah and not associate with their daughter. That word removal makes sense too, because you're completely removed from not just the congregation, but your entire previous way of life.
The problem with disfellowshipping is they scare you into not leaving, because they'll cut your entire social structure off from you. At least for people who grow up in it, that's all you have. You get disfellowshipped, it's like going into the world at 7 years old.
My name is Dr. Ryan Lee. I have a doctorate in clinical psychology. I'm a former Jehovah's Witness who currently practices as a therapist specializing in helping former cult members.
How does disfellowshipping affect former Jehovah's Witnesses?
Of all the things that I work on, The disfellowshipping aspect is one of the gnarliest, most destructive aspects of everything that this cult can do to people. People say that it's worse than death.
Tell me about your disfellowshipping.
I had realized that I was in a high control group, and I realized that I didn't believe it anymore. And I reached that conclusion on my own without looking at what the organization would consider to be apostate material. Eventually, I felt like I was kind of going stir crazy because I was what we in the ex-witness community would call PMO, physically in, mentally out. And that's really hard. You feel, I mean, you really are living a double life.
I moved out here to Utah like single, just wanting to do my own thing, not thinking about leaving the organization at all. I actually got into some trouble. I met a guy out here and he was also a Jehovah's Witness, and we did some things that were not allowed, and I got disfellowshipped and he did not.
I sort of went through this long process of coming to grips with the fact that I was going to have to say goodbye to everybody in my life. I don't know if you've seen the episode of The Office where Michael leaves and it's his last day at the office and nobody else knows it, but he does. And so he goes around and like has one last little moment of connection with everybody. That's what I did. But part of the difficulty that you go through is just wondering, but is my family actually going to do that? Like maybe they love me more than these other people I'm seeing on the internet. Like surely my family relationship is special.
Yeah, so that happened and we went to the elders because you have like a giant like guilt complex that's like drilled into you. And so I was actually the one that was like, dude, like we need to tell someone, like we need to talk to the elders. And so we did. And then we both got publicly reproved. And then it happened again. And then again, I was like, we got to do it. Like, we got to go tell him. And that last time, they disfellowshipped me and just privately reproved him. And he was allowed to stay.
I was disfellowshipped. It was on the grounds of immorality. I had a girlfriend at the time and moved out of state to be with her. And then we both ended up getting disfellowshipped. I knew what I was doing was, you know, by Christian standards, morally wrong. And I felt really guilty about it. So I was honest with them. And they said, well, our decision is to disfellowship you. And so I was disfellowshipped for about 5 years. I wanted to try to get reinstated again. And it took over a year. I worked my ass off to get back in. And when I finally did, they shower you with love and, oh, hey, it's so good to see you. And yeah, whenever everybody was finally allowed to talk to me again, that love lasted for a fleeting amount of time.
When you're disfellowshipped, it's always a judicial committee meeting. You know, you sit down with 3 men. It's insane. Like the questions that they ask you, like in a judicial committee meeting, it is disgusting. Were you on birth control? Why were you on birth control?
I officially wrote my letter stating that I didn't want to be involved with it anymore. Formally, that's known as disassociation among the church, but they will announce it the exact same at the hall.
Sonia Erickson has been disfellowshipped.
There's no distinction between disfellowshipping and disassociation as far as the rest of the members are concerned. So a couple months later, one of the elders called me. At the end of it, he pretty much said, well, this is a really sad day. I'm really sorry that you're leaving Jehovah. And I told him, look, I'm not leaving God. I'm leaving an organization that puts man, the governing body, above God. He said, well, it's the same thing.
So, were you shunned?
Yes, I am shunned. It happened pretty quickly, too. It started to get passed around the congregation and to my parents. So they called me freaking out. And that's still a conversation that I have literal nightmares about. It was the worst. It was one of the worst days of my life was having those conversations with my parents.
All the rest of my siblings were already long gone from the organization, so they were free game. But my mom, my stepdad, and my grandma, all the people that I thought were close friends, you know, they'd act like you don't exist. And even after I got reinstated, some of them still wouldn't talk to me. That's more of a personal thing than an organizational thing, but some of the things they teach you lead to that personal belief that I can't have the same relationship with you that I did before.
Yep. Because it was for apostasy, a lot of people didn't even contact me because I was considered toxic. The worst part of it was the week before I was supposed to be disfellowshipped, I ended up being hospitalized. I needed a blood transfusion. I lost consciousness and was seizing, and my wife had to call the squad, and we were taken to the hospital. And I was in the hospital for almost a week, and my dad never contacted me even once. I wasn't even officially disfellowshipped yet. My mom visited the hospital. We did have a good conversation, but she ended by saying, well, we're going to be following the arrangement, and we won't be talking to you.
Really what we're talking about when we say disfellowshipping is the shunning. You know, if disfellowshipping simply just meant we're officially acknowledging you're no longer part of our organization, okay, that's fine. It's really the shunning that goes along with this that is so insidious.
It is kind of terrifying to me at this age to think that if I were to be officially disfellowshipped, I would probably lose over half my family and they wouldn't talk to me. Because that's what they're told to do. My mom fully believes that because I'm not a part of the religion, that I will die come Armageddon. That I have no shot because I'm not a part of this one religious group.
Yep.
How did it feel?
I had never really experienced anger before. Not really. It's not fair. I didn't choose to be born into this religion. And my parents, they held me in their hands as a baby and changed my diapers and knew the whole time, somehow in the back of their head, that if I ever left the religion, they were okay with tossing that baby aside.
It can be really devastating. It makes people feel really alone. And people internalize that. You know, a lot of the work that I do with people is really helping them understand that this isn't personal. There's always this feeling that goes with it. Like, well, I saw other people disfellowshipped and I know that people did that, but I never expected my family would shun me, that they would cut me out, you know, that there was always some feeling of, but it's me, but we have this relationship. Like, we would never do that to each other, right?
Even now, like, thinking about what my life is going to look like if my parents never leave, it's really heartbreaking. Like, I want them to be around. Like, eventually, maybe I'd like to have kids, and what, you're not gonna have their grandparents? Like, it sucks.
Tell me about the risks of suicide.
I can tell you that a large portion of the people I work with consider it, contemplate it, because of the depth of the pain. That there are times when they're in so much pain that the idea of ending it seems like a potential solution.
I had always had depression.
The thing that creates and why it would lead to that is, again, the idea that you're worthless, that you literally are worthless, and also that you're not just like some burdenous person, but you're also an evil person, you're a bad person, you know, all that other stuff. It makes you at least question that, if not actually feel that. That's literally, again, the point of why they do that, because they want you to feel that way. They intentionally create that turmoil inside of yourself because that's part of the idea of, like, okay, and if we can do that, then they'll desperately try to come back, and then they probably will never leave again because they'll be too fearful of these repercussions that they brought onto themselves by you know, spurning us, basically. That's literally the worst part of it, I think, is that's the entire point of why they do that. They want to create the worst possible situation, feeling, scenario, health situation, everything, you know, inside of you. Because, I mean, obviously the doctrine, the huge piece of it is literally getting rid of any and all autonomy that you have, any independence that you have, any will or desire for it. Because they do not want you to be anything but a monoton. They want you to be robotically dedicated and devout, a slave, faithful and discreet to the doctrine. That's the idea, is you've exercised your built-in mechanism as a unique individual living being made in God's image to do what he literally would have put into you as a creator if he was the thing. And God forbid you do that. Well, that's evil. That's Satan and his demons now, you know. And so then it leads to all this shit again. And you're back in the cycle of the destruction of you as a being and a person. They want to destroy everything that is you and your own identity and who you are as a unique individual, and your will to want to pursue that or find that or think on your own or feel on your own or choose autonomously to do what you want to or you like or whatever else. And then when they do this, the whole isolation, the whole rejection and abandonment of you, and the spurning and shunning of you and your existence, and potentially ridicule or, you know, basically defamation in a way, you now are going to be even more isolated than you were before, because of how insular it is, the intentionality of that, so that when you do get excommunicated, it's effectively what it is, you're just fucked. And you will end up feeling those feelings or thinking those things. Because how could your family, who supposedly cares about you and brought you up, do that to you? It can go into an entirely different but related topic in terms of like therapy and psychology of like, can you really call that love or compassion or understanding or care? Because obviously if your family does that, did they ever really give a fuck about you? Did they ever really give a damn? Did they ever really care? Did they ever really love you? Did they ever really, you know, try to give you any compassion or understanding? Clearly, I would argue, no. They never obviously had that in the first place. Because if they did, I don't care if it's via the indoctrination. It proves they don't have it. Because if you truly have that, and you hold on to that as a piece of who you are, as a living person, a being, then it doesn't matter how indoctrinated you are. You're going to let that become the dominant thing of like, you know what, even if I have to experience the same shit, I'm going to be with those I care about the most. Because you will have that compassion, you will have that understanding, you will have that love and that care for that person, and that love should triumph over everything else. It should trump and crush everything else, including your God and your religion and your doctrine and everything else. So I would argue that it proves that they do not love you. They never have, they never probably will. Because they're so brainwashed and indoctrinated into this, worshiping this doctrine, that you don't matter. Only that faith matters. And that's one of the most twisted, sick, I would actually even argue demented, fucked up things, sadistic. But it's very intentionally designed that way. That's how you consistently get this exact result, where everybody kind of agrees with each other in their experience.
But I had never been legitimately suicidal, and I was for a while. A surprisingly long time after leaving, like maybe 2 years after I was disfellowshipped, it was back, and I had an attempt that landed me in the hospital again.
I didn't think that I was going to survive it, honestly. Like, I had to go make friends, otherwise I would not be alive right now. Like, plain and simple, it was that bad. And I am not really someone who has thoughts like that often, but this was definitely a case where it was like, okay, I just would rather be dead than like deal with this.
Social isolation is one of the worst things that you can do to a person. That's why the worst punishment used to be exile or, solitary confinement. It is one of the deepest things, but it's not only that, it's that Jehovah's Witnesses are counter-prepared for the world, not just under-prepared, but counter-prepared, meaning they're infused with all these ideas that everything that exists in this universe, literally, is ruled by Satan and is ominous and evil and out to get you. Everybody who is not a witness is in some way puppeted by the devil, and you cannot trust anybody. And so just being out in the world, in addition to the loneliness that comes with that, they feel inequipped to deal with it, and they have all of these kind of underlying mechanisms and programmings that make them very mistrustful and a bit paranoid sometimes, which further inhibits their ability to make those connections.
I don't know. It feels like you can't breathe, like everything is changed. Everything is different overnight. And I didn't have any friends outside of the witnesses. And then I moved out here and I knew literally no one. It was really lonely. It was super lonely.
Your entire identity and your sense of self is wrapped up in being a Jehovah's Witness. And being disfellowshipped is being cut off from a religious standpoint. It's being cut off from essentially the ark that God is going to use during Armageddon. The ark before the flood comes. And once that door shuts, nobody else is going to be able to get on.
I kind of started deconstructing more recently. The last year and a half or so, I was just totally content believing that Armageddon was going to happen someday and I was just going to die. And it's like, I would rather be living my life now and just die than be wrapped up in all of this and have everything about my life controlled.
Are the people who disfellowship evil?
No. Evil is such a challenging concept. I don't think that the people who disfellowship are evil.
In my experience, the people who are part of this organization mean well. Their intentions are good. They are acting according to what they have been told this universe is about.
That's one of the things that frustrates me the most about people, because they'll take things like this and they'll just excuse it away. To me, that's an excuse. You're excusing it away and giving them a reason to be like they are and do the things that they do. On one hand, I understand that you're understanding that these people, whether you admit it or not, they're incredibly gullible, potentially desperate people that want something like a paradise earth or something because they're scared of mortality or, God forbid, whatever else. So they want to believe in this kind of a thing. They want to believe. It's a very human thing for some reason to be obsessed over fearing mortality and wanting to extend your life as long as possible and or literally potentially become, in this case, immortal. Supposedly the true coming of paradise is, because in Jehovah's Witnesses, the initial paradise earth is not the real paradise earth. It's like a trial run of apparently 1,000 years. And then whoever apparently that was resurrected that proved they were not actually worthy of that, then also get exterminated, basically. Okay, they die. They're executed, whatever you want to see it as. They drop dead. They become part of the worldly earth as well. And then you restart Paradise Earth a second time. And then, and only then, was everyone perfect. And therefore, they all get their everlasting life, which is literally immortality. I'll never understand that aspect of humanity because I do not fear my death. I actually love and I'm rather excited the fact I am very mortal and my mortality exists because I do not want to live as long as possible. I mean, I do, but I don't. I don't really care if I died at 51, which is 20 years away, basically. I genuinely could give two fucks. I don't care. It's a half a fucking century. That's an insane amount of time to live. That is a ridiculous amount of time to live. A ridiculous amount of history that you've lived through and experienced. Yeah, and so there's that excuse. And actually what I just said before, right? Just really recently in this video, I was talking about the whole love thing. Do they really love you? Do they really care about you? There is endless excuses given towards abusive people. And I'd say especially when it's your family members. I have a lot of personal experience with that, which is ironic considering how much trauma that they have experienced and how much they excuse my dad or other people and the shit that they've done. And it's including to them. And yet they just excuse it away by saying, well, no, he just loves you in his own weird, fucked up way. That is not love then. It is incapable of being love. Love is only one vibration, one energy, one frequency. It can never be mistaken. There's only one true love. It can never be mistaken. It can't. That's a fact. There's only one wavelength. And that is not it. There cannot be a weird form of love, or weird way of loving somebody. There cannot be a fucked up way of loving you or loving somebody. That is literally impossible. That does not fucking exist. And it is, in a way, excusing it away. Excusing the abuses that they put us through. Of no, that's wrong. They do love us. Just in their own weird fucked up way. That's called excusing it away. Same fucking thing. People do this all the time. They just excuse shit away. They always have some excuse or reason that they'll just pluck out of their ass and throw at you and say, nope, that's a trump card. It trumps anything else you could play in the deck. I win. It's excused. And I hate that with a passion because it is so wrong. You are violating yourself, not just everyone else, when you do that. It's very frustrating. Like, on one hand, again, I understand the idea of trying to give, like, put yourself into those people's shoes and understanding them and why they would do that. In this case, it's the indoctrination. Being gullible dumbasses, technically, if you're blunt about it, is what it is. Nobody would say that because it's disrespectful or rude. Well, I don't mind being a dick. If it means being bluntly honest, I'll fucking say it. Again, the main point is, you can tell I have a lot of personal experiences, and I have some negative emotion tied to it. I still have, not necessarily a trigger, because you would know if I'm triggered, but like, just animosity held and contempt held towards this kind of mentality and this kind of shit. It's very frustrating. Because you really are excusing it away. You're trying to be way too nice to these people. Despite the fact that we all, including myself, understand they're indoctrinated because they're gullible. I don't care. You can acknowledge that while also acknowledging they're being pieces of shit. They're being incompassionate, uncaring, ununderstanding assholes who are literally choosing their doctrine, their religion, their violent fucking religion, their traumatizing, abusive religion, over giving compassion, understanding, love, and care to those who should be the most defended, protected, and cared about and supported by them, which is their family members. I don't care who you are, we can disagree on this, but that is always wrong. There will never be any defense for doing that. I don't care if you got gullibilized, we'll pretend that's a word, into being indoctrinated by a cult. You are wrong for that. And yes, you are a bad person for that, in my opinion. It's the same way I view military personnel, or people going into military. Any armed forces, anywhere, ever. It's, you have done a wrong, and it's one of the most egregious wrongs you can commit. You have no forgiveness from me. You deserve every bit of trauma you experience as a result. I sincerely feel that way and believe that with all of my heart, because I know what it's like to go through that, and nobody should have to go through it. But in this case, you're choosing to put yourself through it. You have done this to yourself. You deserve to reap what you've sown. You know, and that's kind of how I see it. And I know, I'm sure most people are going to disagree with me on that, and most people will feel offended or click away or dislike the video or report it or whatever for that. And honestly, at this point, I don't care. You want to know an honest piece of me, that's a piece of me right there from these kinds of experiences. So I just want to point out how that, for me, what Ryan is saying here is incredibly frustrating for me, if you can't tell. It makes me very emotive because I have a lot of personal first-hand experience with that, and even second-hand experience because of the rest of my family, and even my best friend, and a bunch of other people who have been through the same kind of shit. And you want to excuse it away. You're not acknowledging it and then saying, but yes, what they're doing is indefensibly wrong. No, you want to give the qualifying excuses of like, oh, well, they can't help it. You know, or they just didn't see what they were getting into because they have such a great cover or whatever else. And I will always refuse to accept that because I know that is a wrongful mentality to hold. Like, you know, give everybody the space to be supported and be understood, but don't fucking patronize them and lie to them, or otherwise beat around the bush because you don't want to be rude or disrespectful. Bludgeon them with honesty if you have to. I'm serious. That's the best recipe you can do. It hurts, but the truth is going to be one of the most painful bitches to have to be bludgeoned by sometimes. But that's life. It's a prerequisite and requirement to exist in the first place. It's just, and yeah, obviously I've had a lot of personal experience with people bludgeoning me with honest truth. And it makes me fucking pissed in the moment. Absolutely livid, because how dare you? You know, because you violated my comfort zone. And it's fine. That's to be expected in life. It happens. And I know people obsessively do use this. They use it as an example way too often, and most often it's probably not even applicable. or remotely comparable, which is always comparing stuff to Nazism. But in this case, it is not wrong to use it. It is actually perfect example to use in that thing. Where, again, one of the ways that people consistently excuse away wrongs is, in this case, say, when they might lose their job, right? AKA, I'm just doing what I'm told. I'm just doing my job. I'm doing as instructed. I was told I had to say this to you, or I had to do this, or I had to prevent you from getting food in a survival situation, or going to a store in a survival situation. If somebody dies, well, we're also not liable for it because a disaster happened. So, but we're also just following orders from higher ups. So, you know, and you're bootlicking. You're just doing what you're told without exercising, oh, I don't know, your autonomy to say, you know what, this is wrong. I refuse to uphold that. I'm going to rebel against that, and I will do the exact opposite, because people need help. They do not need to be refused that help because some higher up in a probably lives in a mansion of fucking Cape Cod because their fucking politicians say, no, absolutely not, do not let them do that. I'm going to make them do it. I'm going to forcefully let that happen anyway. I'm going to actually work with these people, even if I have to physically bludgeon some other of my personnel, aka my other cops or whatever, to the side to let them in, because this is not okay. You have that every right to do, whether it's that or any other response, no matter what situation it is, to defy orders, to break the rules. And there is so many instances these days, especially now more than ever, where you should be breaking rules. You should be defying the orders you were given. You should say, this is wrong, I will not be doing that. I will be doing the exact opposite, because that is the right thing to do. Because it shows compassion, understanding, care, and everything else. But instead, most people these days, they just bootlick. They just excuse away the wrongdoings that happen. And guess what? That's what happened that led to the buildup of Nazi Germany. They just followed orders. They just did what they were told. They just followed along with it. Again, plays into the basic human psychology of how gullible people are. You can manipulate people into believing or doing anything. It's the stupidest easy thing. Just look throughout human history. In fact, look at how exactly Adolf Hitler did that to convince millions of people across Europe, let alone in other places in the world, of his crazy, absolutely wrongful beliefs and doctrines, laws. How did you, and it happened really fast. It happened within like a decade. No more than maybe a decade, which is insane. And if you let that sink in and you think about that, what did he do to convince them? He used repetition, and he slowly kept increasing his dramatic emphasis every single time. That is the most basic tool throughout human history that's been used to indoctrinate people because of how easily manipulable a human brain is. It's that easy to manipulate somebody. This is the same thing. You're basically licking the boots and excusing it away. And I find that to be, again, that's why it's comparable to Nazi Germany, because it's very wrongful. They excuse that shit away. And it's ironic because in my last video, I actually cut out a portion talking about facing the lion, because there was something in that that again reminded me of the whole Nazi German thing, because for some reason, at least growing up in my life, there was this obsession amongst a lot of JWs and congregations over that book, Facing the Lion. The reason why is because she was a Jehovah's Witness, and in case you didn't know, which I doubt you don't, but just in case you didn't learn this yet, Jehovah's Witnesses were treated equally on par with Jews. AKA, they'd be sent to Auschwitz and all the other concentration camps or death marches and labor camps and exterminated, if they managed to be caught or if they didn't manage to escape. I can't remember if this woman in Facing the Lion had escaped or if she had somehow managed to evade the entire time the Nazi Germans trying to round up these people. And for some reason, they're obsessed, especially with like she was so desperate she had to eat yeast, raw yeast. And if you don't know what that does, it bubbles up in your stomach and whatever else. But the point is, they keep using that. And the only thing you think of is because they think, oh, it's because it was Jehovah God's will and protection, because it proves it's the one true religion is Jehovah's Witnesses, and that's why she was protected and she never got caught, and or that she was able to escape with her life and be able to make it through and live a pretty long life in freedom. like, it's ironic that there's actually a weird amount of association in the opposite direction that Jehovah's Witnesses use to prove that they actually kind of have some of the Nazi doctrine or ideals or ways of manipulating and indoctrinating people. And then you excusing it away makes it akin to what all those millions of people did back in those days too, in the 30s and 40s with Nazi Germany and their doctrine. All those people just excuse it away. No, it's, I don't believe it, but, I got to follow orders. I might die, or I might get sent to a concentration camp, or I might, lose my job or get put on a list or be targeted or whatever. And you have the choice to allow yourself to have that happen, to do the right thing, even if that is technically being a martyr and allowing yourself to be killed for it. Let yourself be killed for it. It's the dumbest thing. Like, it's the right choice is to allow yourself to potentially be slaughtered for that. That would have been the right choice by those people. But instead, they feared for their life, their mortality once again, and go figure, they easily got manipulated into licking those boots and following their orders. And it's just super, super irritating.
People themselves are not bad people. I think they're misled. I think they're brainwashed. And they're only doing what they're told because they think it's the right thing to do, even the elders.
It makes people do evil things, like cut their family out or let their children die for lack of a blood transfusion, or cover up sexual abuse. There are evil things that are done. And yes, I feel the organization as an entity itself is evil, but as much as sometimes I'd like to, I can't say that the people in it are evil. They're misguided. And they are working against their own better nature for how a parent should treat their children.
It has helped a lot of people get out of bad situations from drugs, from a violent life. But after a while, you need to graduate to something else and start learning for yourself. Like Romans 12:2 and Philippians 2:12 says to prove to yourself and work out your own salvation. The way the organization is built now, you have these other people working out your own salvation. You just need to follow the rules.
Yep. My cousin was disfellowshipped for a while as a witness. I shunned them. It was totally passive in my life. Your indoctrination defense mechanisms kick in, and you just have trained your brain to not think about that stuff. And when you do, to blame the person, because how dare they reject the truth? What kind of crazy person learns the truth and then is like, no, I don't want to believe the truth anymore?
What do you think, like this language changing from disfellowshipping to removing, do you think that it's going to make any substantial difference in people's lives or how they go about it?
The shift itself isn't going to make any difference. The changes that they're making, like they're doing a little bit more than just changing the name, but it's very slight adjustments.
There was a change recently. They're not calling them disfellowshipped anymore. They're just removed from the congregation. And you can now reach out if you're going to invite them to a meeting.
Generally speaking, the elders only meet with somebody one time or twice before deciding to disfellowship them. And what Watchtower is proposing is that they're going to give people more chances. And the other thing is they're not going to disfellowship or remove minors anymore unless, and the unless is unless you're an apostate.
Before the memorial, that's their big thing. My mom and my dad both called on separate occasions, and they both sent me this video, and it was an update about, how you're allowed to reach out if you're inviting them to a meeting. It's really sad because it's as soon as the governing body gave them a little bit, my parents were obviously so excited that they could reach out to me, which breaks my heart because I know they're just trying to do what they think is the right thing.
This is a pain that doesn't go away. It lessens, it becomes more manageable. People develop their capacity in life and they expand their social circle, build new communities. But there's never a point in life where it doesn't hurt that your mother and father or your immediate family simply will not talk to you or have any part in your life simply because of a choice you made to leave the religion.
We've all had friends that we don't talk to anymore because things have happened. But to treat somebody like they don't exist, that's completely different. Imagine if your mother stopped talking to you and pretended like you didn't exist.
I'm not even scratching the surface of how fucked up it is.
At a time in your life where you need somebody more than ever. The people who are supposed to be there for you are just unwilling.
If a person treated you the way the organization treats its members, you wouldn't want to be friends with them. Everything that's good about the religion is not unique, and everything that is unique about the religion is not good.
Damn. So what do I make of this? What do I make of this whole ordeal? If you are a Jehovah's Witness watching this, I hope that you can feel that I attempted to do this in good faith. Granted, it was an unorthodox experiment, but I'm really concerned for the well-being of the people there. I want to make sure that y'all are okay, because I've heard a lot of scary things that speak to the contrary. And I want to give credit where credit is due and say that this does seem like a genuine improvement. Now, I figured that the people here, they were going to be, so stuck in their ways. They were going to be so adamant about, well, nope, he's a disfellowship person and I just have to ignore him. But instead, what I found was that nobody wants to disfellowship people. Nobody wants to treat their friend and their brother like they don't exist. Instead,
then don't.
People were excited to soften this policy, even just a little bit, so that they could maintain their humanness and say hello to somebody that they miss. And so, is this a step in the right direction? Yes. And in talking to some of these ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, it sounds like this policy kind of opened the floodgates a little bit for their family members to reach out to them and say, hey, I'm just calling you to invite you to the next Kingdom Hall meeting, but also I love you and how are you doing and I miss you so much. And it kills me that that's what's happening. It kills me that people are so eager to have a sense of reconnection with their loved ones that they haven't been allowed to communicate with for years. And this is what it took. It took the Norwegian government to twist the arm of the governing body to get them to soften on a really bad policy. Here's what I want to say. Is this a step in the right direction? Yes, it is a step in the right direction, but the Jehovah's Witnesses are a mile off base from where they should be. The more I study the Jehovah's Witnesses, the more I am just gutted by how awful and gut-wrenching these stories are. The fact is, the only time in which you're allowed to talk to disfellowshipped people is in the Kingdom Hall. Oh, cool. Well, my son that's been disfellowshipped, I can talk to him twice a week in the Kingdom Hall after church. Okay, yeah, I mean, that's an inch in the right direction, but if I were to ask any of these people here today, well, hey, you want to go grab a meal? They would say no. And then they would quote 1 Corinthians 5:11. I might be able to say hi to a friend after an elder gives a talk at a Kingdom Hall, but then if I asked him, hey, you want to hop on Discord later? No can do. You want to join a soccer league? You want to talk to a friend at school? You want to cry on someone's shoulder? You want to express how lonely you are? No, you can't do that. That's not allowed. And the thing that kills me more and more, the deeper I go with this, is often just how silly and austere these rules are for no reason. It's been so long since I've found a group that is this terrified, just absolutely petrified of the end. The kind of self-policing that goes on here, the kind of backbiting and the conspiratorial thinking is insane to me. Raymond Franz, who was a member of the governing body, he wrote Crisis of Conscience. He was one of the less than a dozen members of the governing body who were the final say on all things doctrine in the Jehovah's Witness organization. He was disfellowshipped. He was removed from his position, he was fired, he was ostracized from his community. On what grounds was he disfellowshipped from the congregation? For eating with a disfellowshipped person. He got spaghetti and meatballs with No-Go Joe. And they took one of the most respected members of their community, one of the brightest theological minds that they had to offer, and they kicked him to the curb because he ate a meal with a disfellowshipped person. Now, to be fair, there was a lot of politics involved, but that is the reason that was used to justify it. And a lot of these people who were disfellowshipped for very minimal crimes, they're disfellowshipped either in perpetuity for being an apostate, or they're disfellowshipped for months often for really innocuous things, like looking at pornography or having sex with your girlfriend that you've been in a relationship with for 3 years. Question for you. How long was Peter disfellowshipped after denying the Lord? I feel like it was a really quick turnaround. Something like 3 days. And maybe the thing that breaks my heart the most is that honest people with honest questions are treated like a contaminant. They need to be quarantined. They need to be kicked out of the body because they're going to infect everyone else with these dangerous questions. And I've seen...
Remember that last video? Yeah. Yep. At the end, the lead elder in that fucking video they had of, what was it, like, Be Courageous convention from 2018, symposium, literally straight up says, no, it's me and my mindset that's wrong. I need to stop being so selfish and independent, allowing myself to have independent thoughts. They literally straight up come out and say it straight out of like, no, do not use your brain ever. Just don't use it. Do not think. Just do. They literally straight up fucking say it right then and there. Literally. It's still viewable on obviously JW.org. Like, they don't there's certain things modern day they don't even try to hide anymore. Probably because they know how well indoctrinated everyone is and that is devout and still a member, because most of their members are getting up into old age now, that are still devout. You're literally not supposed to question. You're not supposed to think. That's the point. That's the point. That's a huge... I've talked about it at length ad nauseum before. There's not a damn thing in the Jehovah's Witness doctrine that makes a lick of sense anyway. And most of it isn't even based in biblical stuff in the first place. Either that or it's highly corrupted and weirdly misinterpreted, warped from what clearly is being stated. Or at least of the main possibilities. It's just... it's frustrating.
Over and over again, people get kicked out of the Jehovah's Witnesses because they just have minor differences in opinion. People who believe the Bible, people who love Jesus, people who are terrified of the apocalypse are still kicked out of this organization because of minor issues of conscience, minor discrepancies in how they interpret the scriptures. People are often kicked out of the Jehovah's Witness organization, not for denying the apocalypse, not for denying the authenticity of the Bible as the Word of God, but for questioning the blood transfusion doctrine, or questioning the disfellowshipping arrangement, or bringing up the year 1975. And any deviation from the official Watchtower position is stomped out with the fist of God. And it's so crazy to me, the certainty with which the elders and everyone else in this congregation is willing to assert to everyone else. The reality is that all of this is coming from the governing body. You know, the governing body that gets excommunicated for eating with a disfellowshipped person. The governing body who has a problem with alcohol. The governing body who is human.
That motherfucker literally did that on a Sunday during a meeting. He was at the liquor store buying a massive amount of liquor. And that's one of the funny... Anthony Morris, right? Yeah. That's one of the funniest fucking things in the world. It's like, yeah, that's actually not remotely unexpected. That's actually about what I would expect. Yeah, that's pretty on brand. Like, how stupid can you be? It proves they don't even take themselves seriously.
And I think that's what I want to end all of this on. The big takeaway here is not that the governing body or that Jehovah's Witnesses are bad people. It's that they're people. All of them. And I think the governing body has a very bad interpretation of Scripture in many places. And I think if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, I think you feel that deep down. Is it really the case that the invisible presence of Christ came to rule over the earth in 1914? Is it really the case that the apostles in the first century were talking about blood transfusions when they said don't drink blood? And is it really the case that you shouldn't talk to your friends and family if they leave the faith? None of the people I spoke to today were bad people. Hell, I would say that the fact that they were eager to talk to me because of this new disfellowshipping arrangement is proof of the fact that they're people and they don't want to ostracize others. There's a line in Crisis of Conscience that broke my heart. He mentions it in passing. Victims of victims. Yep. And that just kills me inside. Because it feels like...
That's my entire family. Like, multi-generational is just victims of victims. Endless throughout, probably as far back as we can actually find. It's just constantly victimizing themselves and each other and being victimized by others and their own, older family or siblings or whatever else. Just constant abuse. It's just like great time, fun time, and that's exactly the problem. Yeah, I guess it goes into the idea of hurt people, because that's mostly true. I say mostly true because obviously you don't have to be a traumatized or hurt person to hurt other people. You can just be born a callous, heartless piece of shit, but that is rare. And I think, again, that's one of the reasons why I get so emotive and agitated and frustrated with people and the excuse making, everything else, because at some point you have to break the fucking cycle. You can't just keep taking the same steps or keep making the same moves or keep addressing it the same way, because it proves it doesn't work. Your definition of insanity. You're just smashing your fucking face as hard as you can at the same spot in the same brick wall over and over again for hundreds of years potentially. You aren't breaking your fucking cycle. Break it. Like, what's so hard to understand about that? That's like, again, the case of like, look in the fucking mirror. You're not breaking your cycle. And you wonder why it just keeps being repetitious. It keeps happening. It's because you aren't breaking the cycle. The cycle is just going to loop incessantly until you fucking snap it in half. You break it. You sever it. Then you can finally release everything from that cycle and you can try to build something different.
Everyone here, from the top to the bottom, is just afraid of themselves. This bizarre organization that is just, in a standoff with themselves. This never-ending witch hunt, this never-ending purity test of trying to determine if somebody is secretly not believing hard enough or not, pioneering long enough or not doing whatever the hell the governing body is saying to do this month. Now, I'll caveat that by saying I know that there have been real victims by really bad people here. But I don't think that the average person who has disfellowshipped a friend is necessarily a bad person, because to a lesser extent I know what that feels like. My best friend and I, we converted to Christianity together, and we deconverted at about the same time. There was a solid decade in there where we were brothers in Christ and we were very passionate about the faith together, but towards the end we could both see each other slipping. And the exact same Bible verses that the Jehovah's Witnesses use to point to disfellowshipping, I was looking at and wondering, well, if my best friend falls away from the faith, or he starts becoming ungodly, is it the right thing for me to disfellowship him? I obviously wouldn't have used that terminology as an evangelical, but in moments where he seemed further along in his deconversion or deconstruction than I did, I felt a sense of fear. Is he a threat to my faith? Is he a threat to my worldview? Is he going to drag me down with him? And I think that my theology thankfully took me to a place that didn't mandate that from me. But there was a real question there of, do I need to excommunicate my friend? My best friend? And spoiler alert, he is still my best friend. And he's still my brother. And I don't know what I would have ever done without him. So I want to extend an apology to the ex-Jehovah's Witness community and to the Jehovah's Witness community. If you've been disfellowshipped, I'm so sorry for the hell that you had to experience. And if
didn't have to,
you're an ex-JW or a JW who has disfellowshipped somebody, I'm sorry for that too. And all I can say is that I'm glad that I was never in a community governed by fear,
that would have propelled me to do something that unthinkable.
I will admit that I didn't think that doing this video today would have evoked at any point like such an intense, it really wasn't intense. For me, it isn't intense. For a lot of people it probably is, but for me it isn't. I am a naturally emotionally intense person, so when I get intense, I mean, it's abundantly clear, including to myself. It's very overwhelming and overpowering, but that's why I know from my own, being myself, it wasn't actually intense, but still having very strong emotional, I don't know if reaction is the quite the right word, but just feelings towards certain aspects of this, because, again, as I've stated before, I still have a long way to go. I made it a long way. I'm about a year in, if not a year in now, to my EMDR therapy for, obviously traumas and everything like that. It, like, just about every memory, major memory, and all these other different things that we're reprocessing or have reprocessed have almost always came down to a lack of having any kind of will from people that are supposed to listen or to care, to validate, or to give enough compassion or try to understand or anything like that. Everything came from more of a place of authoritativeness and control and everything, and it was very, very frustrating. It didn't matter if it was my family or my parents, if it was the school district and all the different people and personnel of school, of the school system, or even psychiatry. Like, it was in all three major places, it was always invalidating. It was always violating. It was always ignoring or not caring or not listening or whatever else, or never being good enough, right? Telling you that you're always wrong, or that you can never basically be right, or you can always be wrong, or you can never do enough, or you can never be enough. So obviously, again, in my personal experience, it's going to still come up. It's going to still have an emotional pull, because I still have, despite about a year of therapy, like I said, there's still a long ass way for me to go, and healing fully and recovering. Through that, it does allow me to be able to kind of relate to that kind of stuff, while also helping you see that, like, one of the ways it manifests in me is defensiveness. I get very, very aggressively defensive, like a dog in a corner kind of aggressive defense, where it's like, it's an attack-oriented defense. That's a learned survival mechanism of behavior that I'm still barely scratching the surface of healing in myself, because I'm still experiencing that with so many people, whether they're in an authority position or not, and whether they're family or not, especially family. And it's just really frustrating, overwhelming. And, I can recognize, obviously, and I consistently make sure to point that out even to myself, and let alone to my therapist or to my mom or to anybody else. Like, everybody in my family, specifically me, my siblings, and my mom, all still have so much trauma and so much work to do to be able to heal from all of our experiences. And obviously, everybody's unique, autonomous, individual living being. That's a phrase I say a lot in these videos, because it's one of the most imperative facts of life itself and existence itself to acknowledge. We are all autonomous, individual living beings, unique living beings. We are going to all be very different. And that's actually one of the most beautiful things about life and about individuality and being, a living being, because it allows us to have an endless, vast array of so many different perspectives, thoughts, opinions, beliefs, ways of thinking, logic engines, as I call it, which is, your cognitive function, because everybody's different in their logic. And the reason why this is very valid here is because not just as my family experienced these traumas and everything else in very unique ways themselves. It's super interesting to notice and observe. But you also, I'm sure, are going to have a very different experience and a very different way of responding to these things yourself. Whether it's from the Jehovah's Witnesses exclusively, or it's from family situations, or school, or God forbid, whatever else, you're going to have a different response too. You may not understand what I'm talking about because you may have had a completely different lived experience through to this very day with those experiences, with those traumas, yeah, with those bad memories, bad experiences. But it still shows and it proves to you that, like, I am capable of understanding that. Of understanding that, like, not only is that the case, but I know what it's like to be constantly invalidated or scorned, basically, and ridiculed for the fact that you questioned something, or you thought about something, or you came to a conclusion that was contrary or different to what was expected of you to come to. You know, whatever else. I know what that's like. I've experienced that. And obviously I've experienced ridicule from my dad, especially. When it came down to questioning the doctrine, because I always questioned the Bible and I always questioned the doctrine. Even when I was really little, I would do that occasionally when I got the balls to do it, so to speak, because I knew it was a risk. I knew I'd probably be absolutely demolished by my dad for such, you know, insolent actions, such apostasy, you know. And I was a kid. I still didn't know what the fuck apostasy was or meant, and I didn't until actually I was an adult. Because I didn't care enough to learn, because it was the right thing to do. So there's that phrase again, right? It was the right thing to do, was to question, to think it through, and be like, determine if it makes sense to you or not. And if it doesn't, then you need to question it further, because, and the people who do believe in it, because how does this make sense? And how does that make sense? And that doesn't make sense because this, and that, or whatever else, right? You know, I do get that. But at the same time, this is alluding or leading into me mentioning this aspect, which is that somehow, thankfully, I didn't really experience the full shunning or the full disfellowshipping by my family. Of course, I wasn't baptized, so that does mean that I couldn't technically be disfellowshipped. But I was never an official member, even though I was born and raised into it, making me by default a member technically. This is saying, again, you still had all your restrictions, you know. But it was fortunate enough that I was able to have some friends, and all my friends were not Jehovah's Witnesses. Those friends of mine growing up were all worldly people. And I think that's really unique and really cool that I was allowed to have them. We even had them over to our house sometimes. I did a fucking backyard play on our back deck with one of my friends that lived across the street from us. At one point, I still remember really well, which was really cool. And we had some people from the cul-de-sac come out into the backyard and sit in these chairs and stuff and watch our short little play we put on with a bunch of like puppets or other things we had created ourselves, which I think was really cool. Jumped on the trampoline for hours or whatever when we had it. Yeah, so many different things like that. I played PlayStation with one of them a lot. Took him on picnics. I just found a picture from one of those fucking picnics actually yesterday, which was really cool. And of course, this is super long ago now, right? And yeah, none of those friends I had growing up stayed in my life as friends, and for, well, reasons I don't really know. Because I've always experienced friend drift, if you will. Basically, the people you had as friends that you hung out with, spent the most time with, just kind of drifted away, and almost, it's themselves actually in a way kind of avoided you. And it was weird, and to this day I don't understand why. At least some of them I can figure ideas of why some of them would have, but most of them I couldn't figure out why they did that. But you know, it's like, okay, cool. You know, you learn that it's a learned behavior that's normal to have happen, because again, in my case, it was kind of the reverse of what usually happens with JWs, right? In terms of, like, say, disfellowshipping or somebody leaving the religion, so now you can't be friends with this person because you have to shun them or whatever, right? So it was the reverse. I was experiencing it as if I was being disfellowshipped by these worldly people, which is kind of ironic. And of course, you know, I didn't think anything of it. I've always kind of been a more flow type person, so I just kind of went with whatever happened. I just always just didn't really think of it. I just kind of accepted it and kept living my life. And I'm thankful for that too, that I was able to do that, including as a kid, because I think that saved me a lot of overthinking, a lot of stress, a lot of turmoil, a lot of validation issues with myself. Yeah, it's just, it might actually, both my sister and my brother, I'd say especially my brothers, actually have the worst, most traumatic experiences, I feel like, of us kids with the J-dubs and their doctrines and everything. But that's why I'm thankful to know that I've always been a very autonomous person, including in mind, where I'm very self-trusting. I actually trust my intuition, and I trust my intelligence, and I trust my ability to, use logic and understand and break things down and analyze things, and know that I can trust myself even if I'm standing against the entire world who disagrees with me and says that's absolutely wrong. Then I'm happy to be wrong to literally everybody on earth, and that's just always been my mentality. I could give two fucks if you think I couldn't be the most biggest lunatic that's ever existed. Good for you. I don't care. Have fun with that, Scream it from the rooftops if you feel the need, I guess. It's kind of been my mentality, especially once I got to adulthood. But even then, it's funny because slowly, surely I've been realizing, looking back, I'm like, actually, I was kind of already like this back then. I just didn't think about it that way. I never really thought about myself like that at all, because it didn't need to, So now it's interesting to kind of self-analyze and introspect and realize, including in the past and now, and realize these correlations, connections, be like, actually, that is how I was back then too as a little kid. I was really actually, like, I was really self-aware, and I was really perceptive and really savvy mentally and cognitively. Like, I could figure things out pretty quickly, and I was also therefore very self-confident. I understood, especially in those kind of determinations that I make mentally, like, I know that this is to be true, and therefore I'm content in that. And I didn't feel the need to preach it or to say that. Nowadays I'm way more likely to do that and be kind of opinionated. Way less than I used to be at my peak though, but because I'm definitely getting better with that, thankfully. But that still ties back into the defense mechanism, where I get hyper opinionated, because it's like, black, white, yes, no, I am absolutely correct, and you cannot be any more wrong than you are. And I will fucking, die on that hill, and to my own detriment if I have to scream how right I am, how wrong you are. And it's just the defense mechanism is really all it is. It's that survival instinct kicking in, that learned behavior, that negative learned behavior because of the trauma I've been through. And again, that's how all this ties into each other and kind of is associated. Because I felt the need to point that out, that I did have otherwise a pretty different upbringing, despite overall it being very strict. My dad, with the doctrine and his interpretation of it, which was also, by the way, intensely different and far more control-based and authoritarian than even the elders at all the congregations taught it and believed it was. And, they're the ones who get the direct communication, the direct instruction and rules and doctrine and interpretations from the governing body themselves. So it's very interesting that my dad had this entirely different universe in regards to beliefs and what the doctrine dictated or said, and what the scriptures actually meant, and everything else. His interpretations were so different than even the elders and the Bethel and the governing body would interpret. Very odd, very interesting, but kind of predictable, because as a human being, he was just generally that way too. It's a different story though. But yeah, so like, despite that, somehow we were allowed to have friends that were worldly. My sister, all but I think maybe one or two for a short period, friends within Jehovah's Witnesses. All the rest of them were out. They were all worldly themselves. Her longest standing friends in life, that she still has most of them to this day, are all worldly people. They were the most reliable people that she's ever had in her life, and I find that to be amazing. The most supportive and loving and kind and compassionate, and actually living life and finding themselves in enjoying each other's hobbies and interests, and what they find entertaining and what they find valuable and everything in their lives, rather than just being shut-ins and being like, nope, can't do anything because it's all worldly, it's all Satan and his demons. I mean, it's pretty cool. My sister's always been very independent, but more in like an alpha female way, like clichely alpha female. She's always been definitely an alpha. So, you know, it was just getting herself to get out there, get her autonomy in terms of the typical sense. So her own friend group, you know, doing her own activities, her own things, her following her own interests, thinking her own way, believing what she wanted, while also, you know, building her own life for herself in the cliche sense of like, you know, working her ass off. She started her first job, I think, at 15, and she's worked ever since. 15. And a huge reason why was because of my dad, and because of the witnesses, but especially my dad. And the way he enforced that kind of doctrine and everything, and the Jehovah's Witness stuff. And she genuinely tried. She wanted to try to be as good of a JW as possible and study and believe in everything she wanted to believe, but she was driven away. And she understood, like, it was the more true part of who she really was, and her cognitive thoughts of like, this doesn't add up. This doesn't make any sense, you know. And my experience is especially negative. So eventually she left herself, and, you know, she's dominated life on her own the whole time, you know. But at the same time, I suppose in observation, in hindsight, if you think about the overall picture, that could also have caused more confusion than maybe even me and her actually recognize we have. Like, on one hand, it's good. It's a positive that we were allowed to have that. But on the other hand, you could also argue it was potentially negatively impactful, because you're teaching your kid this contradiction. You're saying absolutely you cannot associate or do anything with worldly people or worldly things, but at the same time, we're also technically being allowed to have those relationships and do some of those activities. And that's really bizarre if you think about it. Like, how could that, think about how easily that could really fuck up somebody's head, especially as they're forming, right? As they're forming and they're coming into their own person and growing into adulthood as a kid and a preteen and a teen, you know, that's gonna fuck you up. That's gonna fuck with your head. And that's obviously a really bad thing too. So I can see arguments both directions with that. But yeah, like, obviously I have a stupid amount of personal experience with invalidation and with having to defend yourself always, and it never mattering anyway because you'll never be good enough, or you can never be right, or this or the other thing. My entire life so far has been full of that. Basically also being harshly judged. Having your siblings harshly judge you at all times, to where they criticize you and they call it, you know, and they basically do the same thing that our dad did, which is invalidation. And nope, you can only be wrong, and nope, that's not good enough, because the judgment is, oh, you have to pass and jump over these thresholds, and if you pass those, actually it's still not good enough, we're going to add a bunch more steps now, and it just keeps building and building. And so I understand, and I know that, I'm very self-aware to know that, like, that's where a lot of that more emotivity there was coming from, of like being pretty adamant about like, no, this is not the right thing to do. You should not be, in this case, as I said here later, repeating the cycle, doing the same thing over and over. You need to stop doing that. You need to learn that that's the bad thing to do. That's the wrong way to do it and handle it. You do not keep smashing your head on the same part of the brick wall, that you have for God knows how long, dealing with people who have been manipulated and convinced via being gullible and desperate of these horrible things, to where they're like, yeah, they have the independent choice, that the independence has been revoked by that doctrine and by the fear mongering, but you're still a unique living being. You have the ability to go deeper in yourself, past the fucking doctrine and the belief and the faith, and yank out that actual self you have and say, you know what, veto. I'm not going to follow this rule in particular because I know it's wrong, and that is not okay. I'm going to continue to associate with my child or my sibling or my father, you know, grandpa, whatever it is, my best friend, despite the fact they've been disfellowshipped, or despite the fact that they're an apostate. I will continue to do so because I trust in myself enough that they will not be able to pull me away or indoctrinate, basically manipulate or convince me of these supposedly satanically influenced worldly things. I have the confidence in myself to know that I sincerely believe in this, and that will never happen. but I'm still going to make sure that I support them fully and I show them my compassion, my understanding, my love, even if I don't agree with them and I don't agree with the choices they make or whatever else, or the things they believe. I can accept those differences because this is the right thing to do. Define the doctrine. Anybody can access that. I know it's way easier said than done, but you got to be willing to put in that work to maintain that sense of self, that technical autonomy, and be like, no, I care too much and love too much to follow this doctrine in this instance. You know? So in other words, the basic idea is you got to break the cycle of just excusing away the damage that these people cause, and that are clearly probably being caused to themselves because of their own stupidity and gullibility. And again, you know, that's this whole defensiveness in my life experience is exactly where that emotivity on that front has came from. Now I'm gonna finally shut the fuck up. It's been over 2.5 hours, and it was a 40-minute or 48-minute video. That's wild. All right. Well, anyway, thank you for watching, and feel free to leave a comment or observation or thought or perspective, whatever, in the comments below. I hope you stay safe out there. Goodbye.